I see all kinds of people when working night shifts at a 24/7 coffee shop in the center of my city. There are the writers who sit hunched over their laptops, typing away as their third coffee turns cold in the wee hours of the night. It's easy to spot the students spilling papers on the floor, tapping their feet frantically as they cram before the next day's exam. Jet-lagged tourists who haven't adjusted to the time change, yawning as they video call their close ones back home. So many strangers on different life paths, they add a dash of color to the monotony of my shift as I try to guess where they come from, where they're going. Then there are the creeps. It's a big city, so they're bound to show up now and then. Sometimes they're drunk and crude, other times they are silent and menacing, running their eyes over my body as I fix them a pot of our cheapest brew. They start out by calling me dollar sweetheart and quickly progress to bitch and cunt when I don't return their advances. I'd have quit a long time ago if Dobry, my boyfriend of 3 years, didn't work similar hours at the bar next door. Whenever things start looking dangerous, I drop him a missed call underneath the counter and he shows up 5 minutes later. His tall frame and sharp Slavic features can be quite imposing when he wants them to be. Just over a week ago I had a shift start with a warning from the day crew about a creep at the window seat. "Watch out for that guy," Betty, my friend Zilla, spoke in hushed tones as she stuffed a bag of expired croissants in her backpack. "He hasn't tried anything, but he's been leering at all the girls." "Dobry working tonight, I hope?" "Nah, not working, but he's with some friends next door." "Thanks for the heads up," I replied, taking a good look at the evening crowd. There was the man Zilla mentioned sitting at the farthest table. He was a middle-aged, clean-cut type with a faded gold wedding ring on his left hand. At first, he seemed to be looking out the window. Innocent enough, I thought. But no. A closer look revealed him using the reflection in the darkened glass to stare at me. I groaned inwardly and sent Dobry a text warning him I might need help later on. There weren't many others in that night. 2 student girls had shown up with a load of books, probably intending to study, but now sat chatting away in one of the booths. A woman in her 50s sat at a small table, reading a book as she sipped a large frothy latte. Probably a regular from the day crowd who'd stayed too late because she couldn't put down her novel. At one of the window spots, a couple was in the throes of a heated argument, hurling menacing whispers back and forth as they glanced around nervously to see if anyone was listening. Overall, it wasn't too busy. The evening wore on, and the fighting couple and gossiping students left shortly after midnight. Unfortunately, the creepy man remained where he was, and I was grateful for whatever thrilling novel was keeping the lady glued to her seat. Even with the safety of the backroom and my boyfriend a call away, I still felt uneasy at the thought of being left alone with the guy. The hours went by with little for me to do as neither customer made any new orders. Every now and then I would study the man. Whenever I looked his way, he'd pretend to be typing something on his phone, but I could tell he was mostly just staring at me. He kept both hands above the table and didn't harass me, so I didn't see any reason to call Dobry, even though the man's presence unsettled me. At around 1 a.m., the woman finally looked up from her book and seemed genuinely startled by the time on the clock. "Oh dear me," she cried out, looking around the coffee shop like she'd forgotten where she was. A second later, she got up and walked over to the counter. "Could you please ring me up?" she asked, digging around in her handbag, presumably searching for a wallet. "Sure thing," I replied. I was about to announce her tab total when I noticed a woman had stopped rummaging and was staring at me with an undisguised look of horror. On second thought, she spoke in a subdued voice. "I think I'd like to get a cup of the rooibos tea. With a cinnamon bun. Thank you." She turned and walked back to her seat, but didn't pick up her book again. Just like the man, she sat unnaturally still, staring at me. Oh brother, I thought. It was going to be one of those nights. I busied myself with the woman's order as I studied the calendar on the wall, counting down the weeks until my vacation. It really couldn't come soon enough. I wasn't planning anything special, didn't have the money for it, but it would be nice to just get a week of cozy evenings in front of the TV. My thoughts were interrupted by a bell that signaled the arrival of a new customer. I turned around with the lady customer's tray and nearly dropped it when I saw my boyfriend stomping through the doorway. Dobry looked drunk, but that wasn't all. A grimace contorted his normally sweet face, giving him a positively feral look. Zilla and Tom stopped by and told me about the creep he slurred, dropping a hard fist on a nearby table. Is them over there? He raised his voice, pointing at the man, who was already scrambling to gather his things. Miss. The man stammered in the croaky voice of someone who hadn't spoken for a while. I'd like to pay please. His voice trembled and his hands shook as he approached the counter, trying not to look at Dobry. Motherfucker, you're coming with me. No, Dobry. He hasn't done anything. I cried out as my boyfriend grabbed the man by the collar and dragged him outside. Through the window, I saw Dobry throw the man to the pavement. The other customer and I ran outside just in time for pedestrians to pull the two apart. Dave, one of Dobry's coworkers, came out and hauled my boyfriend back to the bar. The man from the window seat scrambled back inside the coffee shop, grabbed his things, threw a $100 bill on the table, and left without saying a word. I collapsed in one of the booth seats. My hands trembled and my insides turned. I hated when he drank too much. Sober Dobry was the sweetest, kindest, most caring man I'd ever met. But whenever he had too many, I'd see a dark shadow cross his face. It was like there was another, more primitive man hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be unleashed. Betty? Is it okay if I call you by your name? I'd entirely forgotten about the woman. I tensed as she gestured to my name tag, taking the seat across from me. Please don't be afraid of me. My name is Agnes and I want to help you. I studied her closely for the first time that night. I'd been so focused on the man that I hadn't noticed the somewhat eccentric appearance of the lady in front of me. Agnes had frizzy, unkempt white hair that fell to her shoulder blades. She wore a long purple kimono with a black cloth belt wrapped around her thin waist. Her eyes had a kind glint to them, drawing you in and making you feel comforted, safe. I relaxed my body. Thanks, I forced a small smile. I'm just a bit shaken. I'll be fine in a minute. What I'm about to say to you is going to sound very strange. Agnes spoke after a short pause. I could see her struggling to find the right words. You have to close the coffee shop early tonight. Then, you need to go straight to the airport and buy a ticket to your hometown. Call your parents, tell them you'll be staying with them for a week. Just 1 week. I stared at Agnes. Great. First a creep, then drunk Dobry, now a mental case. This shift was breaking all records. I should go get your order ready, I replied, plastering a fake customer-facing smile on my face. Agnes grabbed my hand as I tried to move, the lines on her face riddled with concern. I know this sounds crazy to you. She put my hand in both of hers. But I can see things that others don't. It's how I make my living, and I usually never intervene unless clients come to me directly. But I had a vision as you were ringing me up earlier, the ugliest of my entire career. I couldn't just walk out. I couldn't leave anyone to a fate as cruel as yours. Logic told me to get back behind the counter, get some distance from the loon. However, I'd started feeling something when she'd taken my hand. It was a warm blanket of a feeling, like a hug from a dear friend. I felt a powerful energy circulating the room, detaching us from reality. Agnes took my silence as permission to continue. You have known it for some time now. People think of the future as the great unknown, but our past habits can predict so much about where we'll end up. Think about the man you share your life with. Think back to the scenes you rationalized away in your mind. The times he drank and took things too far. He's never laid a hand on me. I snapped back a little too quickly, my cheeks flushed with color. What about his words? Agnes's stare floored me. She knew, but how? How did she know about the fights we'd had in the beginning? All those times I'd felt ashamed of doing, saying, wearing the wrong thing. I'd blamed myself for angering Dobry. He just cared about me, that's all. He was so kind and loving when I was being good that I started to believe he had reason to be angry when I was being bad. It does not end well for you if you go home with him tonight, Agnes continued. You might live. My powers are not almighty and I do not see it all, but what I do see is terrible enough. Broken ribs, a loss of vision in the right eye, irreparable damage to several organs. You might live, but a shattered, broken life. A life of picking up the pieces. Agnes stood up, went over to her table and gathered her things. She cleared out the contents of her wallet and put them on the counter. That and the tip from the other man should be enough for a ticket. It is very late now, and I have to go home. Sweet Betty, I hope you heed my warning. I'll repeat it as it came to me. You only need to be gone for 1 week, but he can't know where you are. So don't tell anyone and ask your parents to lie if he calls. Go as soon as you can. With those words, she came over to me, wiped away a tear that had slipped down my cheek, and walked out of the coffee shop. I watched Agnes go. A few minutes after she left, reality started seeping in, and I tried to convince myself she was just a crazy woman off the street. I went back behind the counter, trying to force myself into work mode, when I saw my phone. There was a string of texts from Dobry. They started obviously drunk and grew chillingly sober. Babe, come over to the bar. Dave won't let me leave. Betty? Serious, this is fucked up, he don't let me come. Why the fuck are you ignoring me? Are you with that guy? The old guy? You slut. I bet you're sucking it right now. You fucking bitch. I'm going to kill you. The last text came in while I was reading the others. It was enough for me to grab the money Agnes and the man had left behind, order a cab, call my parents, and switch my phone to airplane mode. That way Dobry wouldn't be able to track me through the Find My Friends app, which he insisted I have running in the background at all times. Within 10 minutes, I was in the cab and on my way to the airport. My phone remained on airplane mode for a week. I told my parents everything, leaving out the part about Agnes, but filling them in on the emotionally abusive aspects of my relationship with Dobry. It was such a relief to get the facts out after 3 years of silence. Dobry called my parents, and they pretended not to know where I was. My dad wanted me to file a restraining order right away, but I told him I just wanted to rest a little and would do it the next week. It was pure torture waiting out those 7 days. The more I reflected, the more I understood just how screwed up my life was. How would I go back to the apartment to fetch my things? What would I say to the lawyer when Dobry hadn't actually done anything? Anxiety held me captive throughout, and I shook with anticipation when I finally turned on my phone after 7.5 days had passed. A flood of texts came in. More vile stuff from Dobry, but also a bunch of messages from Zilla, urging me to call her back. I dialed her right away. Where on earth have you been? She picked up on the first ring. Hi, I hesitated. At my parents'. Why? What's happened? Dobry is dead, she replied and went quiet. How did it happen? I asked after a long pause. Look, I don't know, I wasn't there, but it was messed up, okay? Maybe he was on a bad trip or something. What happened? I repeated. You disappeared and Dobry just lost his shit. Tom said he came into work 2 nights ago completely deranged. Went behind the counter when it wasn't his shift, broke a bottle of Jack, and started stabbing Dave in the gut with the broken bottle, screaming that it was all Dave's fault that you'd run off with some old guy. How? I gulped. Is Dave okay? How did Dobry die? Dave's recovering in the hospital, Zilla's voice quivered. Someone called the cops and the guys in the bar were able to restrain Dobry. Then the cops got there. They let him go for a split second, and he tried to stab another person with a pocket knife. A rookie cop ended up panicking and shooting him in the face. I thanked Zilla for letting me know and hung up the phone, promising I'd be home soon. Then I went to the bathroom and threw up my lunch. I hoped Dave would be okay, and thanked my lucky stars that Agnes was there to warn me not to go home. I shudder to think what would have happened if I had ignored her warning. It's taken me a day, but I've made arrangements to fly back home. I just called my boss and apologized for skipping town without warning. I told her I knew I'd screwed up by disappearing like that, but I really hoped I'd get a chance to come back to the coffee shop. My boss said she'd have to think about it. I really hope she'll give me my job back. I don't want to work anywhere else. I can't think of a single place that has so many different fascinating types of people. Though, I think I'll ask for the day shift if they do take me back. Just to be safe.